Are you a business owner or are you a business operator? Which I think a lot of entrepreneurs fall into and leaders fall into is operating than leading and owning. So that's something that we can strive for. And what I mean by, operating is, are you doing everything? Because one of the things that, and myself, I have to work on this too, is learning to delegate. If you want to be a good leader, you have to learn how to delegate and be comfortable with the delegation. And, and then actually have systems and accountability systems set up with the people you're delegating to. So, I think what a lot of leaders sometimes make errors when they're delegating is they're not specific enough what they want. And a lot of times, when leaders say, well, my team is not doing their work, I was like, well, did you spell out exactly what you wanted them to do? Did you put it out there? Did you, were you very explicit what you expect from them? And sometimes they'll say no. I would just assume that they would understand. I'm like, no, you cannot assume that, because when you make assumptions, which we all do, it can make errors, and that's why there's. I'm sure you've heard a popular word statement about assume.
Have you ever caught yourself in a self-sabotaging behaviour? Procrastination, for example. I've definitely done that one a lot. Or perfectionism. I've been known to do that as well. Well, I'm getting better, I hope. We've all done it, I think. If not those two, then something else. Especially if you're a business owner, or a first-time manager, or a solopreneur, even a student. Like, what student doesn't procrastinate on that essay? It's an inevitable part of being human. Well, maybe not. Today I'm joined by guest Albert Bramante, a talent agent with more than 2 decades of experience in the entertainment industry. He also holds a Ph.D. in psychology, and if that wasn't enough, he's a certified hypnotist and NLP practitioner too. So a pretty unique blend of psychological insight and practical expertise, which helps him with his day job, with coaching and inspiring actors to cultivate their mindset, their conscientiousness, to rise above these self-sabotaging habits. And all of which, of course, also generates a pretty interesting conversation today from a perspective and an industry that we've not really explored before on Leading with Integrity. So I'm certainly looking forward to getting into it, and I hope you enjoy it too.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
Albert, welcome to Leading with Integrity. Wonderful to have you on the show today.
Thank you, David, for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here.
Of course, yeah. And to kick us off, over to you for a bit. Tell the listeners a bit about yourself, your career so far, what you do today, why you do it.
Sure. Well, my name is Dr. Albert Bramante. I am a talent agent in New York. I represent actors for film, TV, theater, commercial, print, voiceover. I also been a college professor. I have a doctorate in psychology, and been doing this for about 22 years. I work. I also coach actors, and coach performers, mindset coaching, and especially in the performance mindset area. That's like my specialty. Overcoming subconscious blocks, self-sabotage, fear of success, imposter syndrome, blocks of money. So those are the kind of things that I deal with. And those are the type of people I work with. So I've been doing that for the past, several years as well. I wrote a book in 2024 called Rise Above the Script, and it deals with self-doubt and self-sabotage for performers. And even though it was written for its actors, the model that I kind of work with can apply to really anybody who's performing, whether you're a coach, whether you're a leader, whether you're sales, or even a teacher, presenter. You're still in some aspect performing.
I mean, it's quite I guess the word is varied, isn't it? Eclectic. mix of qualifications and backgrounds there. So, I mean, I guess the performance aspect, as you say, is the common thread. But I mean, how did you go from one to the other, or was it all at the same time and just went for everything?
Well, yeah, I'm glad you asked, because when I was in high school, I was in college. I was very interested in the performing arts at some level. Wasn't an area of focus of mine, but it was an interest. So I was involved in a lot of organizations, drama clubs, and theater clubs, and I took some theater classes and acting classes as electives in college, and I enjoyed the process. And then after graduating with my master's degree, I had happened to stumble across a couple of artist groups in New York City, because we were doing some advocacy work after 9/11, which, affected the entire world, but especially in my area of New York. So I spent that kind of like revived the acting interest of mine. Now, so I started off like almost all talent agents do, as a performer. And initially, it was interesting to me. It was like a lot of fun, but I really preferred being around actors than being one. But just the environment of being around performers was so invigorating that I really prefer creative types and academic types. Because I've been to academic conferences and they're great and all, but I really feel more at home with creative types than I do with academics. So after a couple of like searching, what do I want to do? I decided I was going to, coach, advocate, and, support actors as much as possible. So the next best thing was to become a talent representative. So 2004, I founded my first agency, my first company. And, I was doing that, so I've been doing it ever since 2004. However, it's something that's very interesting of mine that I was noticing when I was working with so many actors, when I was first starting out, was the theme of self-sabotage that kept coming up. And what I mean by self-sabotage or self-defeating behaviors, or what some people might call it, what would be like in a career sense of not pursuing the best, putting your best foot forward, being your own worst enemy. And that might mean, not showing up for auditions on time, not preparing fully enough. So I was seeing that with the actors I was working with, but even from an educational and teaching standpoint, I was seeing this with students that were, self-sabotaging, that were really good and talented, but they weren't really applying themselves well.
I've seen similar in certain leaders over the years as well, political and otherwise.
Yeah, and it's really is something that is affects all industries and specialties, even some of the high achieving ones, like the high the people that may look right on paper, like the CEOs or the Fortune 500s, the people that are really leading, or in top peak performers, are often struggling internally, and they might even be engaging in self-sabotage, where they could be actually even much more further in their career or their prestige if they got out of their own way.
Yeah, indeed. And so when we talk about self-sabotaging behaviours, I guess I'm trying to think of one that people can probably relate to. I guess one that nearly everyone will have done, probably does today, is procrastination, right? Putting off the things that you don't want to deal with for whatever reason.
Yeah, and I often, because I'm going to call myself out here too, I'm also guilty of that too. But it is one of the biggest saboteurs, you could say, or what really holds us back is procrastination, or even perfectionism. And it's like, trying to be perfect and everything. And a lot of times when you're so wrapped up in perfectionism or even procrastination, nothing will get done. And you could be sitting on so much stuff that you can not only help yourself, but help other people. But nobody will know it if you don't put it out there. And, procrastination is something that might even be rooted in what we're starting to see now in the past, a few years of research and everything, is that procrastination is rooted in trauma. Even like people that may be chronic procrastinators, it's not that they're lazy. They may be reacting to trauma. They might be reacting to something that happened to them, in their childhood that is not resolved. And so this is why, again, it's a good idea to either go to a coach or go to a psychotherapist, that can help you resolve this. And of course, having my background, I can tell you that it's actually a sign of strength, not weakness, if you need, seek help. And because we're all you could say we're all messed up on some level, from just being a human being. So I think that the important thing is that you start knowing yourself. And I think there's even a level of insight, and it's a great thing if you admit that, okay, I'm a procrastinator, I'm a this and that. Because what really sometimes gets sneaky with self-defeating behavior is a lot of people don't realize they're doing it. They may just be sitting around questioning, why is nothing working out, or why am I sitting, why is my life not the way it is? Well, the truth of the matter is that there's some personal accountability that's there. You're not putting yourself forward. You're not doing, you're not working at 100% capacity. Maybe you're working only at 30, 40, 50% capacity. And therefore, you're only going to see 30, 40, 50% of the results that you could be seeing.
Yes, yeah, it makes sense. It's interesting you mentioned the perfectionism thing as well. As someone I used to work with who would very proudly say, perfect is the enemy of the good. And then almost like the next breath would spend 2 hours or whatever looking for the perfect sentence structure in the next email or something.
Yeah, well, and I agree. I mean, I've heard that statement too, that perfect is the enemy of good, because if we try to be perfect, nothing can get done. There's an inaction, and it's better to take the inaction and even if it's a flop, but at least you took the action. And because even if it flops or doesn't go the way you want it to, there's that chance you have that opportunity to revise, enhance. So even for me, the one thing that, and I'll openly talk about with writing my book, I was so much in chronic procrastination with my book that I would sit, in front of a computer screen. And I know a lot of authors can identify, writers can identify. I'll write a paragraph, read it, beat myself up, delete the entire thing. And I could sit down for sometimes a 2 or 3, and I was notorious for this, for 2 or 3 hours and getting nothing done. I'm still having that blank Word document on my screen, or Google Doc on my screen. So the one thing that really I had to work even myself out of is look, this book, no matter how you look at it, is not going to be perfect. And, throw that away. And take the reframe that really helped me out, and it really helps other people out too. If you're doing something for the first time, how can you expect it to be perfect? I'm a first-time author. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to, let me just do it. And that's the whole thing too, is take that imperfect action. So this way it'll be done, because now it's exciting. I'm working on my second book, and even my third, because I took that action, it was successful. But I could have easily been still sitting there in 2025 saying, I'm going to write a book someday. And only 1%, from what I understand, from what I heard, is only 1% of people who say they want to write a book actually follow through with it. And it's such a small number But when I heard that, it was like kind of like my wake up call, because it was like, I don't want to be that 99% of the people who say they want to read a book and then, take it to my grave saying, I wish I wrote a book. So the important thing is to take action, even if it's not perfect. It's not going to be perfect. And, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to, there's going to be errors. But one way to kind of even take that and reframe the mistakes is, I've often said that failure is feedback. So there's no such thing as failure, only feedback. So if you can take the failure aspect of things and look at it like this is feedback. So I like to call it, and other people call it, like failing forward, meaning, okay, that might not have worked out, or that might not have went as planned. But now you have some data. Now you have some information. Now you have some feedback that you can take the next time you implement something, or the next time you reiterate or do a reiteration of it. Now you can really improve on the situation. And now here's your chance to shine by doing something different, by enhancing what you're doing. So the important thing is to take failure as feedback and as information for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a reframe that comes up quite a lot in the leadership context as well. And I think, so it's interesting, particularly from the leadership perspective, and this perfectionism versus procrastination kind of balance, if you will, where it takes on a new dimension. I find as a leader is, you start with it, maybe without realizing it, as you say, you start accidentally perhaps imposing these kind of behaviors on the people you're leading as well. And so when you become that kind of leader where nothing goes out unless it's perfect, we can't allow imperfect things to happen. And that can be actually quite demoralizing for people you're leading, because if they don't feel like they can make those mistakes, have those failures that are essential in order to learn how to succeed, then they're never going to really truly excel at anything.
Right. Yeah. And the thing is, even with that, at least you say you did it, even if it's like, okay, that didn't land the way I wanted it to, or what I expected to, but I did it. I achieved it. And it's something to be proud of. And, eventually, now that you're one step closer to getting, what you want, you're one step closer than you were, even if it, like I said, even if it was a flop, or it didn't land, you're still one step closer to what you've done. Like, I can now, in my case, add author to my, credentials. And, I may not be on the New York Times bestseller list yet, but I'm, one step closer than I was 2 years ago, and that's the way I look at it. So the important thing is to do it. And, and that's where, like, even, when some people say, well, if this, I'm afraid of it failing, but we'll never know if you don't do it, and, because somebody will say, you're like, oh, I'm afraid if I do this, I'm not going to make any money. I'm like, well, I can tell you, I can guarantee if you don't do it, you're not going to make money. So why not do it? And even if you're in the same situation, you've done it. And once you're kind of in action, it's kind of like a domino effect. Once you start taking action, it becomes so amazing, in a sense. It really becomes incredibly amazing once you start taking action.
Absolutely. It reminds me of that old, I don't know if it's a proverb or a cliche, maybe both at this point, but it's the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. But if you never take that first step,
great quote,
you're never going to get anywhere, right? I can't remember who it was. I feel like it's one of those like thousands of years old quotes, and no one can remember who said
I think
it,
it's I don't remember the exact, but I know I believe it's an old Chinese proverb, and from like the BC era. And it's so true today, into even thousands of years later. it's so true that you've got to take the first step. And I talk about this in my book, but I think a lot of people make the mistake of setting too high of a goal at first. It's like you want to get from A to Z overnight instead of going from A to B. Take a small task. For me, let's say your goal is to get more steps in your day now, or become physically fit now, which is a great goal. But you're not, if you've been not exercising for years, you can't expect to be fit overnight. So maybe from A to B might be adding 10 minutes a day of movement to your thing, and then gradually increasing that to more and more things, and then eventually you will get there in a couple of it'll take some time. But a lot of people get discouraged too fast because they set too high of goals. And this is why I'm not a fan of New Year's resolutions. January 1st rolls around, at least in the Western world, and it's like, I'm going to do all of this now. It's a new year. I'm like, well, first of all, it's cliche. And I read a study that over 90% of New Year's resolutions don't stick in the long term. Because it's great to have that lofty goal, but what's a system that you're going to put in place to reach that goal? There's a running joke with a lot of, trainers and gym owners that like January and February are the most crowded in fitness clubs. And then when March rolls around, it's empty again. Because people are making that, lofty New Year's resolution, but not following through. So, and like when somebody says, well, next year I'm going to do this. I'm like, why start next year? Why not start today? Why do we have to wait till a date on the calendar, arbitrary date on the calendar to start?
Yeah, I agree with you. It's funny, we had this conversation in the New Year's special at the beginning of this year about New Year's resolutions, obviously. But you're right. I think it's relevant as well for business owners, for like solopreneurs, as well as any kind of leader, when we think about how we translate a strategy and a vision and a grand goal into actually something that's achievable. And it is. I mean, anyone who's going to do something like that, that you can't go straight to that top level KPI or whatever it is. You've got to break it down into achievable steps to get you to that end state, haven't you? And when you think of it in those kind of business terms, most people will just be like, well, yeah, of course, that makes perfect sense. And yet when we apply it to our own lives, so like fitness, for example, or eating right, or I don't know, reading more, whatever it is that people want to do, they don't think of it in that same way. And I've always found that kind of fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is very fascinating. So,
yeah, and I guess from your psychology perspective as well, you know a lot more about it than I do about why our brains do these things, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, we're always striving to do better, and there's nothing inherently wrong, incorrect with that. It's just the implementation, the action needs maybe enhanced, and that's why having a system, and having a goal setting system in there, like something that's specific, actionable, within reason, and having some sort of actionable thing there. So the one thing I often say, and especially coming with, if you want to follow through, which is what really integrity is all about, are you following your word, is what actions are you going to take? So one of the things that I often say is, someday, this is one of my coaches I borrow from, is someday is a myth. When you say, someday I'm going to write that, and I'll talk to people like, oh, you're an author. Well, someday I'm going to write a book. And the coach part of me, which is obviously I'm not coaching in a lot of these conversations I want to be, where I'm like, okay, I pull up the calendar. I'm like, so tell me when the first chapter is going to be done. Tell me what date. Because if you sit there and say, someday I'm going to do it, it'll never happen. What actions can you take today to ensure that's going to happen? Because when you put it on your calendar, and this is not, Tony Robbins, a lot of business coaches, reiterate this. So it's not like something I come up with new, but when you put it on your calendar, it's real. It's there. It's gonna it's gonna be there. So what date? Start putting things in your calendar, even if it's simple things like I'm gonna, answer these batch of emails, this time of the day. Because when you put things on your calendar and manage your calendar, your life is more masterful and you're more productive and you're going to say what you do. I was talking to people that run several companies and yet spend a lot of time with their families, and they will say, I'm not busy. And you would think, well, you have all this going. No, they have systems set up. They have systems. And then you also see a lot of people that are, spending, blood, sweat, and tears, 80 to 100 hours a week of operating a business that's not going anywhere. Because the one thing that, I think we can all equate is that being busy and being productive and successful are two different things. Busy is, and I was actually reading an article that made a lot of sense. And I forget the author, but it was like why being busy is not ideal. And why being busy, saying you're busy, is more of a, of a non-productive thing. Because again, it's what action are you just doing this work just to keep busy? And I remember last year I did a business mastery summit with Tony Robbins, virtually. And the one thing that kept coming up, which really makes a lot of sense, was, are you a business owner or are you a business operator? Which I think a lot of entrepreneurs fall into and leaders fall into, is operating than leading and owning. So that's something that we can strive for. And what I mean by, operating is, are you doing everything? Because one of the things that, and myself, I have to work on this too, is learning to delegate. If you want to be a good leader, you have to learn how to delegate and be comfortable with the delegation. And, and then actually have systems and accountability systems set up with the people you're delegating to. So, I think what a lot of leaders sometimes make errors when they're delegating is they're not specific enough what they want. And a lot of times, when leaders say, well, my team is not doing their work, I was like, well, did you spell out exactly what you wanted them to do? Did you put it out there? Did you, were you very explicit what you expect from them? And sometimes they'll say no. I would just assume that they would understand. I'm like, no, you cannot assume that, because when you make assumptions, which we all do, it can make errors. And that's why there's, I'm sure you've heard a popular word statement about assume.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's so true with that statement, because you're making a fool. I'm going to say fool, but I'm just saying that that's what you're doing, because you're assuming, you're making presumptions or guesses that this is how somebody should act. This is why I think there's a lot of communication breakdown in relationships, because, well, I just did, someone will be, upset at their partner or their employee, and I would say, well, why? And I'm like, well, this is what they did. I was like, well, and I was like, why is that a problem? Well, they should have known. Okay, I get that. But did you explain it to them? Did you spell it out? Even if you're running a company or in a relationship, did you explain to them, this is what you like to be done, or this is what you expect? Well, no, I just assumed. No, don't do that. Because, and I think also another thing too, if you want to be an effective leader and with integrity, then you also have to follow the same model that you're. It's not, because a lot of times, parents do this, I'll see leaders do this sometimes in companies. Well, they expect certain behaviors out of their, children or their employees, but they're not implementing that on their own. That's why I think it's very brave of leaders sometimes to be somewhat vulnerable and say, look, I made a mistake. I made an error. Because I think sometimes some leaders or, up and coming leaders have the misconception that it must be like omnipotent, omnipotent, which means that that they're godlike. And they must be perfect. There goes that perfectionism again. And no, you can be humble. You can still be a leader and still be like, look, I tried this error, made a mistake, and here I'm coming and making you clean with that. And I see this a lot with even successful companies when they, let's say they get a negative review online, they would respond, and they, and it is that sometimes just taking English, I'm sorry you had that experience. When I see that, a lot of times I'll see even people sometimes retracting their reviews or at least being open. It's like, wow, this is a company I really want to work with, or because they respond to even a negative reviews with, how can I, help your experience better, rather than either ignoring it or getting defensive.
Yeah, you definitely see the defensive ones a lot, and it doesn't always go well for them, I find. Yeah, I mean, so you hit on so many things there, I think, particularly around like this entrepreneur culture, where the way we perceive business owners and the way we kind of place those expectations upon ourselves, like the busyness one, for example. But actually, you look at the really successful ones, as you say, like they're not busy at all. They're leveraging their time. They're getting the most from it in order to free up time to do what they actually want to do. And again, there's a cliche, isn't there, about working to live versus living to work. And but I do think there is this. I'm sure most of the audience will have worked for somebody like that, or worked in a culture like that, where like if your calendar isn't full all the time, all day, every day, all week, then you're perceived as not working hard enough. And it's just, I mean, it's soul destroying. Like it's toxic. I think I've come to believe this. I used to be one of those people, I should add, but it's no good for us, I think.
No, and I think that's a misconception that we have. Like, oh well, our calendar must be full. I'm like, no, because are you doing things that are productive? I mean, we've all been, and even when we were working for companies, we've all been in meetings that were, this could have been an email. I mean, how many times have you been in, think about this. And for the listeners, have you ever, been called to a meeting where it's like, this could have been an email. This could have been a simple note. This could have been a simple memo. But now we've wasted a half an hour to talk about this. Or, we've gone into meetings, that lasted hours long, but yet if we really condensed the messaging behind it, it could have only been like 10, 15 minutes. Why is this hours long? Because a lot of times people get into chit chat or venting, and then it becomes just not a productive meeting anymore. But yeah, I can have my calendar filled from start to finish. These are these meetings, but if they're not productive, I've got nothing done. And that's what I'm saying. I sometimes see, CEOs who have a lot of time, but yet have a lot of successful companies because they know how to delegate and they know what to invest their time into.
Yeah, absolutely. And the delegation one, or the sharing workload, I'm not sure how I feel about the word delegation anymore either. Because I feel like that gets hijacked by bad managers too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, delegating, it should be smart delegation, meaning that, if you have, obviously if you want to run a company, you have to have admin, like to help you with that, not do it yourself. And some people are like, well, I don't trust the because it's their own perfectionism. I can only do it my way. I'm like, no, you have to learn to sometimes let go and let someone else take charge. But then that's where with the integrity aspect comes in. Well, this is why you should do thorough training. This is what you expect. These are the systems you want them to implement. This is the way you've done things. And this is how you'd like it to be done, and have all that expectations laid out in that training manual. That this is why I believe that, like, writing things out. Even for, like, with my agency, we have, like, what we call an intern Bible, where we actually lay out what we expect of our interns to do. So that they can actually start working without even, like, checking in, saying, is there anything? Okay, this is what this, because it's like, okay, this is what I expect you to do on a daily basis. When you come in, do X, Y, and Z. And then as things come up, things will happen. And that's where I would then talk to them. But what I like about that is very often, like I said, they've already been working, like the day starts without me having to say anything, because it's already laid out. This is what I want you to do. So I think having that out, like really having a detailed procedures of what you want the people on, that you're overseeing to complete, and how you want it to be done, and all of that. And also, being a great leader is not just pointing out flaws, but even celebrating successes. Because people want to stay in companies where they feel valued. And there is a high turnover rate, especially, like, I was reading, there's a lot of, they call it the Great Resignation, at least in the United States, where a lot of people are leaving companies. But the biggest reason why they leave a company is they don't feel valued, by leadership. So this is why, as a, leader with integrity, you also have to reward, not just point out, what they're not doing, but point out what they are doing, and praise that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing I see, particularly in like the founder-owner types, when they start delegating, when they first start growing that team, a lot of the times when they are like sharing this work out, they're not specific, because they don't necessarily always know how they want it to go. It's just like this sort of vaguely defined thing that needs to be done. And it's quite, because a lot of us kind of fly by the seat of our pants a little bit with these tasks. Like, I know something has to be done, so I'll learn by doing. And that doesn't work so much when you're asking someone else to do it.
Hey, well, not even for yourself too. It's good to have an idea of exactly a plan. How are you going to execute it, and how are you going to do this? Because winging it might intuitively feel like the way to go. Because it's your company, everything out, but it's a good idea to have still that spelled out even for yourself, so that, again, you're not just being overwhelmed and like thinking, because that's where a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of leaders is, they're thinking a lot of times it's so much responsibility and so much tasks that they're not really focusing again on the outcome and what's important.
Absolutely, which I think is why your approach is good, because if they've not thought that far ahead, it forces them to do it in advance and be specific. And yes, sometimes maybe you can't, in which case maybe don't ask someone else to do it, or work closely with them, make it a cooperative, collaborative kind of task where you learn together and document what you learn as you go, so next time you don't have to have that struggle so much.
Absolutely.
Well, it's been really interesting so far. We've not done any questions yet, really, but I'd really like to go back to, so the industry you work in, obviously the entertainment side of it, it's hard to think of a more creative industry. So I'd love to hear like your tips, your advice particularly for first-time leaders, new managers, and what you think they might be able to learn from that industry about how to cultivate creativity, how to build trust.
Well, the important thing with creativity is a form of intelligence. It's actually something that we're all, as human beings, are inherently drawn to. I mean, especially any parents who, or you've worked with children, they have very vivid and creative imaginations. Now, sometimes, depending on the culture that they're in, the environment that they're in, sometimes that creativity is stifled. We're told stop daydreaming, or get more serious. Like, even for me, a lot. One of the major criticisms I had from school teachers in the school system was that I was daydreaming a lot. And I do that. I'll admit it now. I'm a daydreamer. But that was a constant, regular feedback that I received that I was a daydreamer. And so, but I think what we need to do is keep in touch with our creative side. Because it's something natural that we all have, some sort of. Now, what that looks like for every person may be different. Some people may be painting and art or reading or, or writing or music or doing, but the important thing is whatever that is that you do, you should have an outlet. You should set, even if you're in a purely business setting, like let's say, again, running a Fortune 500 corporate culture, you can still implement creativity in there. And it's important to do that. Take breaks, take creative breaks. For me, one thing I noticed, when I was a student, I liked, and I still do today, when I'm reading or when I'm studying, I like to have music in the background. And that was not what we're told. We're taught in school, like, you need to concentrate fully on your studies. You cannot have any distractions in the background. Like, that's so not true. I wish that, that needs to be debunked. Now, yes, I mean, depending on the type of music, you may not want, maybe not having heavy metal in the background, but now that could work for some people.
Definitely does for me. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. It'll just enhance the creativity. And there is one of the modern models of intelligence, which we call multiple intelligences, is music is one of them. So we need to be enhancing that outlet. So this is why I think it's great to be listening to music while you're working. I think it's great to have a good playlist while you're doing it, because that's your creative side coming in there. And what all creativity is finding different solutions, like thinking outside the box. And even in a corporate, strictly leadership position or corporate environment, you could come up with solutions to problems that people didn't even think of, because you're activating the creative side of your brain. So, like I often say, try to do stuff that will enhance your creativity. Go to art shows, go to listen to music, go to, go to movies, go to, different events, cultural events. Even go to things that you may not think you might like initially. Expand your horizons, and that's the important thing. And that's really what the benefit of creativity is. You just expand your awareness of things. And we all need creativity in our lives. And that's why another thing I often talk about is having hobbies, leisure activities, so that you're not just buried in your work 24/7. You have hobbies, you have interests, you have outside things that bring you joy and inspiration, and you're not just working in work mode 24/7. So yes, creativities are important. Now, the one lesson that I feel can apply to all things to work, to being in the entertainment industry, is perseverance, is resiliency, is grit. Because the industry that I'm in, I feel it's one of the most exciting industries. Of course, I'm biased, and mostly every leader will feel that their own industry is the most exciting, which you should. Because if you don't feel, then you're in the wrong. Why are you doing this? So, having said that this is the most exciting industry, realistically, there's also the most competitive. Realistically, is the most the toughest industry to break into. It's a challenge, and there's going to be more no's than there are yeses, because the performing arts industry is saturated. Overly saturated. And this is worldwide, not just where I'm at in New York, which is like the entertainment, one of the capitals of the world for, especially with theater and Broadway. We have Broadway. So we have hundreds of thousands of actors, kind of at any time in New York. And then, of course, if you go to Hollywood or Los Angeles, now you're talking with so many more actors. So I think one of the recent estimates said there's like over 500,000 working actors just in the United States alone. And only 2 or 3% of them are working steadily. The other 97 to 98% are, even though they're called working actors, are out of work and need survival jobs where they, some of them will work in real estate, some will work in bartending, some will work in education, where they can still, somewhat express their creativity in just another outlet, but while they're waiting for an acting job to come in. So, but especially when you're a young actor, you just graduate from conservatory, university, and you're so excited, you see the lights on Broadway or the Hollywood sign, and you get this major rush of inspiration, and it's great. But that can unfortunately fizzle out very fast when the gravity of the competition and the constantly putting yourself out there and being told no. You're not today. You didn't get the role today. That can start to add up over time. And what I've seen in my years of doing this is there's a high turnover rate amongst actors where they may start out for the first year or two where it's like they're so excited and then they just give up or go to another profession. I'll give you an example. There was a school in Long Island, New York. They had a Bachelor of Fine Arts program in theater. And I went to one of their graduating showcases and they had about 16 students that were graduating with, going to be future actors. And one of the graduates I had signed to my roster, signed to my agency. And a couple of years later, we had met for coffee, just to do a catch up. And so I asked her, I said, well, how are your classmates doing? What's everybody up to? You guys all keeping in touch? And she looked at me, honestly, she said, she really doesn't keep that in touch with that many of them, but what really stood out to me was 14 out of 16 are not acting anymore. They're, either going to corporate or other types of jobs and just put their, acting, career on hold or surrendered it. And I'm thinking to myself, I was like, that's really sad, almost. Now, maybe they realize that this is not what they want to do, and that's fine, but I often think a lot of people just quit. And then another time I was after a performance, I went to this conservatory. They do showcase performances for different plays. And I remember after the show, I was in the cafe getting coffee, and I was overhearing a group of people, the next table are alumni of this program. They've only been out for a year, and they're already talking about putting a towel in. And I'm like, of course, I'm not going to jump and hijack the conversation. But all I thought to myself, I'm like, this is a waste. You spent so much money on your education and you're not going to use it, and this is a profession that takes years to work. And I think another thing that's really important for actors that we can learn from the business world is you need a business sense and acumen. So that's why it's called show business for a reason. The second part of that word is so important. Business. So this is, of course, a dream of mine, but it would be great to see that these training programs for actors have some business classes. It wouldn't be a bad idea if you're going to major in theater and become an actor to require a minor in business administration. Because really, at the heart of it, you're an entrepreneur as an actor. You're the CEO of your own company. Therefore, you have to learn to budget and plan for that. And that's why sometimes having these big, lofty dreams are great. But, if you don't have a plan to action, where it's like, what's your 10 or 20-year plan? And that's minimum. How are you going to survive and thrive in this industry?
There's a few podcasts I listen to myself. One of those, because I'm a a big Battlestar Galactica fan, is Katie Sackhoff's. There's been a few episodes in her podcast where she talks about exactly this and about how she didn't plan for it, she didn't think about it when she entered the industry. But now, like, she's got a business manager, a finance manager, a lawyer, or an agent, all these other people who help her, exactly as you've described there, manage the finance side of it and live when she is and isn't working. And it's an interesting thing because it's hard to think of many other industries where you go into it without thinking about that. I guess most people when they're young don't really think that far ahead, do they, to be fair? But B, like, it doesn't really come up. You have to sort of do it for yourself or it doesn't happen. Like most other industries, they'll give you like a pension, they'll give you benefits, they'll do other things. You'll have regular pay as well. And you'll always, usually, barring extreme economic times, you'll know where the next paycheck is coming from unless, the worst happens. And then it is the worst. Whereas in the entertainment industry, from what I know, not being in it myself, it's quite cyclical, it's quite up and down, it's quite sort of uncertain a lot of the time. Yeah. And there is a parallel there, of course, I think, to being a business owner as well. And particularly like a solopreneur in an SME, that sort of environment.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's no guarantee when you're going to get your next paycheck. And it's not like, okay, you work for this company and you get yourself established and you work in another company. What actors, or especially when you work in a gig economy, is what entertainers do. It's gig to gig, not a job, not a career. So what an actor, especially what the cycle of an actor is, like, every time they have to interview or audition for a company is starting all over again. Whereas at the corporate or non-entertainment, non-creative side, you already have a reputation. So, you've already worked in the company, you got a reputation. You don't really have to prove yourself each time. Whereas, as an actor and entertainer, you have to constantly keep proving yourself over and over again. And that can get overwhelming at times. And that's why I think a lot of actors fall into the imposter syndrome and the fear of success and self-defeating behavior patterns because of putting yourself out there. Over time, adds up. And it takes a toll on you. It takes a toll on your mental and physical and spiritual well-being.
Yeah, I can definitely empathize with that. Yeah. And then there's the leadership side of it as well. Because again, like from the outside, we perceive these famous faces as just like one-person bands, I suppose. They earn their paycheck, they do the job and all of that. But again, as you pointed out, like they've got probably whole organizations under them. They are CEOs of their own, like, machines, effectively. And then
there's a lot of people behind the scenes, yes.
Yeah, and then you read about some of the stories, I'm mentioning no names, of like the way people behave on set and how they become perceived as difficult to work with, and the dismissive kind of attitudes and the holier than thou and I'm famous, don't you know who you're talking to, all of that sort of stuff. And you think, like, I mean, is it true? Who knows these days,
right,
the way the news media works. But if it is true, how are they behaving like that when they've also got these teams of people behind the scenes who are dependent on them? And is that, like, are they thinking about the way they're interacting with their people? Are they treating them the way a good CEO, a good leader would? And
well, sometimes I would have to say we have to drum up these stories with a bit of skepticism when somebody's difficult on set. Yeah, because are they doing it to draw buzz or just to create gossip, which actually draws to their brand?
Yeah. Because or did they just have a bad day and they happened to be?
Did they have a bad day, or were people also unprofessional towards them? Because the one thing I can tell you, what a lot of celebrities and actors really don't like is when people fumble over them, or like worship them. They don't like, even though they're in the spotlight, they don't like that. They don't like that, like, constant staring or the ogling or staring at them constantly. They don't like that. Or like being starstruck. It's like a lot of times they come on set, they're there to work. They're not there to socialize. They're not there to make friends. They're there to work. And so what I often tell, especially younger actors, like, when you meet an A-lister, first of all, you should treat them like a peer, where you just go in, you go to work, and you leave. You don't sit there and idolize, them and and stare at them because that'll be creepy. And they're not going to be receptive of that. So, I think a lot of times what I hear, oh, so-and-so is just not a nice person. Like, well, how did you approach him? Because a lot of times celebrities are pounced on in public. People are constantly running up to them. Can I take your picture? Maybe they're with their family. They're having dinner with their family. Or they're just going out for a stroll. They want to be left alone. So there's different type of contexts that we hear. It's like, well, don't swarm them. They don't want to be swarmed. They're human beings at the end of the day. Now, yes, some do have a sense of entitlement. But that's any industry. Sometimes people that are very, have that pompous entitlement, and you're going to deal with that. But one thing to keep in mind, especially with a lot of entertainers and actors, is what we sometimes forget, I think, as a society, is that we're not separating the character they're playing and the real person that they are, which are two different things. They're two different people. Their persona that they play on screen is much different than their actual, being self. And even musicians too. It's like the one thing I noticed with working with, my years of working with actors and even performers in general, is a lot of them could be very introverted. Yeah, and they may not seem it. Well, they had this larger than life personality on stage or on screen, but I'm like, but they're also very soft spoken off camera because they're not acting. They're really not necessarily performing for an audience. They're performing, as their own creative outlet. So they're going to put on this persona or this hat of being this larger than life character. Because that's what I hear a lot of times too. Like when people meet an actor, even musicians, like, well, they seem so brash and bold on stage, but they're so very timid and soft-spoken in real life.
It's an interesting one, that, isn't it? I guess we hear it in the leadership world and in marketing as well a lot these days about the word authenticity, don't we? And it feels like acting is almost the opposite of that in a lot of ways. Because you're becoming someone else deliberately.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly what it is. You're actually becoming somebody that somebody else wrote on an author wrote. You're just becoming his words. And a lot of times people confuse that. Like one of the best actors I think of in my generation that's living today is Anthony Hopkins. And one of the roles he was well known for was Hannibal Lecter, the serial killer, and the madman. But a lot of people, were going up to him after these movies were made, and first he thought it was funny, but then he found it annoying. People were running up to him and starting to quote, like, or ask him, like do the Hannibal Lecter voice. And it's like, I want my family. Leave me alone. One time I read an article that he was in a cafe with a friend, and they were just chatting, and this waiter kept coming up to him and kept doing these Hannibal Lecter quotes. At first he smiled and he said, but after like the fifth or sixth time, he just looked at the waiter and said, okay, we had enough. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, okay, that is a bit lame. Why would you do that as a waiter? I think even if you genuinely say quietly, like, I like your work, and leave. That's it. Leave them alone. They want to eat, in silence.
Yeah, it's strange that, isn't it? Like, if you see your doctor or something out in a restaurant somewhere, you're not going to go up to them and ask them to diagnose you at the table, are they? Like,
right.
So I don't know why people do that. It's a weird one.
Yeah. Well, I think because, we see these on screen, and I think a lot of people feel like they're one of us, and it's intimate, but these people are working. That's all they are doing, is they're working their own way, their own business. They're playing this character. They're doing a job, and that's, at the end of the day, that's all it is. And that's where a lot of people, I think, get confused with, with actors. And, there is that separate personality. So that's why, like I'll be honest, when I hear actors being difficult or or hostile or rude, I often have to kind of take that with a grain of salt. Because it's like, okay, well, how did you approach them? Where were they rude? Okay, well, maybe they didn't want their picture being taken when they're out with their family.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe you deserved it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so we should probably talk a bit more about leadership, really. I could carry on with this line of conversation for another hour, but I don't want to be respectful of your time. So what would you say from your whole career so far, what has been the biggest leadership lesson that you've learned?
I think the integrity and being on, like being true to your word. And even if like something came up and you can't do something, be honest and say that. And there's also that transparency too, as a leader. That's important. Is being completely transparent. Like even when I work and I bring on and I sign an act at my agency, I'm upfront with them. I'm like, look, I'm going to make no guarantees to you right now. I am not going to guarantee that I'm going to make you a star. If you want somebody, I'm not the right agency for you. And also, I think with a good leader with good integrity is also being able to say no to certain things and certain, opportunities. Because, especially when you're young, when you're early in your career, there's the idea that you have to say yes to everything, and that's not true. Learning to say no is also a very important skill as a leader. And just in general in life, learning to say no to things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, like the saying no from like the business owner perspective, as a leader, like setting boundaries, whether it's telling a waiter to leave you alone or explaining to your boss that you probably aren't best placed to respond to emails at 2:00 in the morning. But that setting those boundaries is really important. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, not just for your sake, but for everybody's sake. I mean,
absolutely.
And there's nothing wrong with gently doing that and telling your boss, like, look, my weekends are my weekend. I'll help you on next week, whatever you need during business time, but I'm not going to be answering my emails at 2 a.m. in the morning. And I know some people that are like that. They're like, my weekends are my weekends. I had one of my colleagues when I was one of colleges I was teaching at, put it in his syllabus, his contract in the beginning of the class, like, do not email me over the weekends. I will not respond. You reach me during Monday through Friday. During the day, I will answer your emails in a timely fashion. But do not expect to email, respond on the weekends. And I'm like, I respect that.
Absolutely, and it doesn't have to be done. I mean, like you say, you can do it politely and nicely. You don't have to
very
be
polite,
mean about it,
but it's still being firm.
Exactly,
because I fell into this trap too, where I think sometimes we become people pleasers, where it's like, oh, I'll do what you want. Yes, I become a proverbial yes man. Mm-hmm. The problem is that it's not going to get you respect at the end of the day. And now, if you're working in a culture where you have these unrealistic asks and they're not respecting your no, and that may not be the place you want to be at.
Indeed.
At the end of the day.
Indeed. And there's that conversation to be had, isn't there? Whether it's, this doesn't work for me, thanks for the opportunity, I'm leaving, or if you would like me to be available 24 hours a day, this is how much more it will cost you.
This is what it's going to cost, or this is what I expect, or this is when it'll be done during business hours. Yeah. And I think a lot of people, are uncomfortable, and it is not an easy conversation to have. But I've even told people too, like when they would propose something to me, I'm like, it's not going to work for me. And here's why. Now, I may come up with some alternatives. We can do this, we can do that. Otherwise, this might not be a good fit at this moment. And I think being okay with that is really important, to say that and to hear it sometimes. Because sometimes we'll make requests, and not every request you're going to make is going to be told yes. when I was, had my, one of my other companies, I usually did that. I had one or two people ask me for a raise. And first of all, I thanked them for asking. It was like, okay, I appreciate it. I can understand you asking me that, but it's not going to work at the moment. And I was okay with that, and because, when people ask that, you do run the risk of, if you can't do it, that they may leave, but I was transparent, and that's where transparency comes in. Is just being like, say, this isn't going to work for me, and here's another mistake I think I see a lot of younger leaders or entrepreneurs do is when they do set boundaries, they apologize, and I don't think you should be doing that. Like, oh, I'm sorry, I can't do this. I'm sorry. Don't say that. Just, this isn't going to work for me, and here's why. End it and be firm.
Yeah, I think there's a question as well of perspectives, isn't there? And I did hear, like, on the flip side of this kind of like the 2 a.m. email example, I did hear tell of a particular CEO who did what I think is the best way to deal with that. Like this individual just so happened, like, everyone has better hours of the day or night where they're more productive. Like, just naturally through our rhythms, each individual will work better at a certain time. For this individual, that happened to be in the middle of the night. But they always started the emails with, I'm sending you this at whatever the time is because it's when I work best. However, I'm not expecting you to respond until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning or next week or whatever it was. So immediately, like, nips in the bud that potential sort of implied, why didn't you answer my email immediately? And that whole aggro piece of it. The important thing of it, and with all of these issues we've just been talking about, is that it is a conversation. I think, that exchange of boundaries, if you like, and understanding where each other are coming from. And then you can have the conversation then about what is the compromise if necessary.
Of course. And here's, this is even another trick that with technology now, when sending out emails, and this is one thing I do too a lot, is schedule your send. So, because sometimes I will respond to emails in the middle of the night, but I may not want it to look like I respond in the middle of the night, so I'll schedule it for the next morning to go out. You can do that too.
You can.
Whatever,
and we've been able to do that for like 30 years, and yet nobody's ever done it.
Yeah. Well, the one thing to do is on whatever time works for you. If you work best in the middle of the night, do that. I mean, that's one of the advantages of being a business owner. Sometimes you can make your own hours, but the important thing is to work on your own terms. Now, of course, if you're working for a company, you're not going to be able to do that always. You're going to have to work in the hours that they tell you to do. But the important thing is to also have alone time and leisure time. So this goes back to what we were saying earlier about having, working 68 hours a week is not productive.
Absolutely. And I think that's why. So there's been a few experiments in recent years, haven't there, with like 4-day work weeks and 3-day work weeks, and they found that actually productivity increased. And I think that's why. It's because when you're like forced to work these 60, 80 hours a week, you're not achieving anymore.
No,
the same outputs are happening in a much shorter period of time.
Well, yeah, now you're going to be tired. Now you're going to be irritable. Now you're going to be, working in a deficient mindset that actually may be actually counterproductive. Absolutely. than to be productive than working all that time. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it should all at the end of the day. I mean, I know it's easier said than done, but at the end of the day, it should be about quality than quantity.
Absolutely, yeah. Unless you work in a factory or something where quantity doesn't.
Well, that's true. Yeah, then it's about quantity. Yes,
but then quality as well still matters, doesn't it?
Yeah, so, of course. Well,
yeah, I guess robots are doing most of that work now, though.
Yeah.
All right, Albert. So I've only got a few more questions for you because I'm conscious of time. So really interested to hear your answer to this one. What's been your best experience of being led?
I think hearing somebody, respecting my point of view. So when a leader can listen to what we're saying and then, be open to the feedback Now, maybe they may not always say yes or no, but I've had, I remember one of my jobs I wanted to was, we all were brought in like, what do you want to do? What do you want your work day to look like? And I just thought like, wow, this is amazing that just even asked, Now, of course, they they may not be able to accommodate everything, but the point is that they were interested in everything. So my best experience, I would say, is when a leader listens to and cares about how what the people think that are working under them, or cares about their well-being.
Yeah, I agreed with that. Listening is leading. And earlier on, like you touched on one of those myths about leaders thinking they have to have all the answers. I think as a subset of that maybe is this idea that the leader is the one who speaks, the one who talks, gives the big speech on the mountaintop or whatever it is, leading from the front, all these other sort of cliche phrases. Whereas actually, I think the opposite. I think, so if you're in a meeting or whatever, the leader shouldn't be the first one to speak. They should listen first, gather those points of view, those perspectives before doing anything else. But it's very rare to find a leader who will actually do that. Because we get it in our own minds, don't we? Like, oh, I'm in charge. I need to talk. I need to go and lead that meeting. Easily done.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So a time travel question for you. If you could go back in time to any point in your life, how far back would you go, and what advice would you give to your younger self?
I probably would go back to like when I was actually 17, 18. And the one thing I would really just tell myself is to stop caring about what other people think. Don't try to impress people. Stop trying to impress people.
That's a great bit of advice. Yeah. I don't think that's exclusive to teenagers, though, is it? Although perhaps that's when it matters most.
Yeah.
Leadership Heroes.
Okay, last question. Always my favourite one as well. It's called Leadership Heroes. So if you had to pick one person, but it could be anyone you can think of, so they could be alive or dead, past or present, real or fictitious, but it's someone who, in your opinion, would perfectly embody leadership. Who would that be for you, and why?
I would have to say, probably one of our U.S. presidents that's dead now, would be Ronald Reagan. And the reason why I chose Reagan is because he was human, compassionate. He poked sometimes in fun at himself, and told a lot of jokes, but also was very compassionate and serious, and followed through on his word.
I think you get bonus points. I don't think anyone's chosen him before.
Mm-hmm.
Well done. Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, he comes up a lot recently, doesn't he, in certain comparisons, kind and unkind.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what I'm saying. Like, it may not be the most traditional choice, but and I think that could be even looked at like whether you agreed with him or not.
Mm.
These were the qualities that he embodied. He was a leader.
Yeah, and I think he's a little bit beyond my memory, but from what I've studied of him since, he was relatable, I think. So like they're telling the jokes, they're not taking himself too seriously all the time.
Yeah.
I think that made people like relate to him and kind of respect him, even if they disagreed with his politics on occasion. Yeah, interesting choice. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Albert, thank you so much for being with us today. Really enjoyed this conversation. We've gone on all sorts of wonderful tangents that I wasn't expecting, which is always the sign of a good conversation, I think. So before you go, if anyone in the audience would like to learn more about you, is there websites or social accounts or anything you'd like to point them towards?
I would definitely point you to my website, albertbramante.com. I have a lot of recordings on there that you can listen to. And then I would also, follow me on LinkedIn, because I post a lot of thought articles and other short form content.
Lovely. Okay, well, and I'll pop those links in the show notes so everyone can find them easily.
Great.
Lovely. Well, thank you again for your time. Have a great rest of your day.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Albert, again for your time and for that conversation today. I really enjoyed it. I'm sure the listeners and the viewers got loads out of it too. Speaking of whom, if you would like to learn more about Albert, his book, or the work that he does, do check out those links in the show notes. And finally, if you are new to leadership, in whatever guise that might take for you, whether a new manager, supervisor, first-time CEO, or founder of your first business growing your first team, and your leadership skills are something that you want to work on, that you've identified as an area for self-development, then I invite you to come and join me in the Integrity Leaders online community, a safe space, a supportive community of new leaders and for new leaders, because leadership can be lonely. It's lonely at the top is a cliche for a reason, but it doesn't have to be. Join us today, gain clarity on your leadership style, lead with confidence, fight off those imposter feelings, and maybe, hopefully, don't feel quite so lonely anymore while you're doing it. And I'll read a quick testimonial for you as well if you're not convinced yet, very kindly provided by one of our existing members, Kearney. Being part of this community has been a great experience. David's welcoming presence and industry expertise create an atmosphere of trust and growth. The inclusive vibe encourages everyone to embrace their personal strengths, and there are plenty of opportunities to get involved. It's an environment where learning and connection thrive. So thank you, Kearney, for those kind words. Listener, viewer, if you want to know more, do pay us a visit at www.leadingwithintegrity.co.uk. Hit that green button on the homepage. You'll also find that link in the show notes below as well. Alternatively, if that's not quite what you're looking for, or if you just want to learn more beforehand, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, drop me a message on there. Always happy to chat leadership with anyone else who's interested or who will listen to me, frankly. Thank you so much for listening. I'll be back next week with my next guest, Sarah Yandel, a fellow leadership enthusiast, a business coach, and founder. I hope you'll join us. And until then, be a leader, not a boss.